And we're back.
Welcome back, everybody, to the only podcast that knows that while 2 is company, 3 is a corporation.
Man, that's so funny.
Thank you.
Honestly, it's almost like this is the second time I've heard it.
You know, it's almost as if we had a whole first take, and then I did something very stupid, and then we had to start a whole new take.
Well, we're learning as we go along, and
Exactly.
there are certain rules that we must abide by that we're not going to tell you, the listener, but
Absolutely
we have to.
not. You can't know these things.
No.
You haven't paid.
It ruins the magic.
Exactly.
It ruins the magic.
Yeah. I'm Dr. Patrick Armshaw.
And I'm Dr. Christopher Silverstein.
We're doctors.
But not doctors.
So it's been a little bit since we've been on the internet.
Yeah.
At least in our podcasting capabilities. And it seems like some things have happened.
Yeah. For you, the listener, it's only going to be just a few seconds, depending on how often you listen to these things.
Yeah.
But
if you're streaming, then we just disappeared into the ether and then immediately came back.
Yeah.
So.
But for us, it's been about 2 weeks. As you can tell, I live on a main road with a bunch of dickheads who like to drive their cars and motorcycles at the highest speed with the loudest of mufflers.
Well, now, Chris, to take the other side of this argument, do consider that they have very tiny penises.
I always consider that.
Yeah.
I always consider that, and I put it into my consideration of how they feel about themselves and their small penises and compensating them with their loud cars and motorcycles. My compassion is at an all-time low. But hey, it only happens 25 times a day.
Well, there you go. It's all water under the increasingly swollen flood of a bridge.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. We'll see how long we'll be on this road. So it's been about 2 weeks for us. So obviously a lot has happened. We won't be able to cover all of it.
Nope. This is not the comprehensive podcast of our dreams, I'm afraid. So instead, we're just going to bring you the hot goss, the most recently spilt tea.
The tea, yes, the tea.
Yeah, and we'll sort of go from there. And where should we start off, Chris?
Well, I think we'll do easy and just start talking about what's going on in Gaza.
Oh, God. Okay. All right. Yeah. No. This is fine. This is fine. There was still some hope left in the world, but now it's crushed.
This is fine.
It's gone now.
This is fine.
Yeah. Okay. So what has happened? Let's see. The Netanyahu administration in Israel has reopened the offensive full force, and let's see, has announced that they are going to be going with the Trump Gaza approach.
Yeah, the Trump Gaza approach of ethnically cleansing Gaza of the Palestinians in place of seems like some kind of Monaco or fictitious Bond villain hangout on the Mediterranean.
I don't know if you've ever seen Superman 2, right? The
old one from the 80s.
Yeah, and Terrence Stamp as Zod. You may know Zod from many a meme on the internet. But so the villain, played by Gene Hackman, Lex Luthor, announces that because he's a fan of beachfront property, all he wants for helping overthrow the world is Australia. And it's a little bit like Netanyahu watched that movie and was like, you know what? What if I could be that supervillain, but just so much worse?
In real life.
Just so much worse.
Not in a comic book, not in a movie, but in
killing
real life.
Large numbers of people worse. That scans.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is, this idea of moving 2 million people out of a territory and moving them where is an interesting question that I don't think... I don't know what the Trump administration talked about moving 1 million people to Libya.
Oh, it's just nonsense talk. They're talking about, first off, we got to get rid of the people who live there, and then we'll start, rebuilding it,
right?
For safety,
right?
Which, to say these things out loud is insane, and it started out at the beginning of Trump's the beginning of Trump's second term, where he was talking about, we're just going to, basically clear everybody out. And the first question everybody had was, because they're taking it seriously, is where are they going to go? And you just get these dumbfounded looks on their faces because they don't really care where they go.
Yeah, they don't think of them as people, I suspect.
Yeah, this is why this is called ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
Another word is genocide that people use. And, it's clear that this is just, it's very in-game kind of conversations.
Yeah.
The
thing is, it's not like we haven't seen this kind of thing be done before.
seen it in America.
Jesus Christ, right? Yeah. Okay. So the Trail of Tears, right there. And how many people died during that relocation? And it was like 20,000 people out of a much smaller population. Right?
Yeah. And this is in the 1800s?
1820s.
1820s. So 20,000 people.
Yeah.
20,000 people in the 1820s. Mm-hmm. We can confirm that in a second. That's a lot of people. The internet.
Yeah. It's quite large. And you may be saying to yourself, okay, well, that was back in the 1800s. They, didn't have the kind of infrastructure that we have today.
1830 to 1850.
1830 to 1850. Okay. So I stand very much corrected on that. But we're still talking about a time before railroads are a major thing in the United States. We're talking about a thing where the road system just isn't there. And you may think, okay, well, it's the modern era. Surely in the modern era, you can move 1 million or 2 million people and it will be fine.
That's insane.
Well, that's it. And to that I say, we have a few examples of 20th century fuckery in that regard. Consider the purging of the Crimean Tatars from Crimea under Stalin.
Right.
This killed tens of thousands of people as well. Consider the consider what happened when Greece became independent of Turkey, and in the aftermath of World War I, the Greco-Turkish War there, you had a huge population transfer of Greeks fleeing the new Turkish Republic and Turks fleeing an expanded Greek Republic. And there it was, done very much with the idea of, okay, we're just going to transfer the populations. It'll all be fine. All the Greeks will live in Greece. All the Turks will live in Turkey. It'll be great. Large numbers of people died.
Yeah. So, you're talking about whenever somebody says, "Oh, we'll just pick them up and move them," why don't you put yourself in that category? And somebody says to you, knocks on your door and says, "Hi, we need this land for something that has nothing to do with you, or something that you consider to be a great crime. We need you to leave right now, never come back, and
we own your stuff now.
We own your stuff now. This will be the second time, if this goes through, it's the second time it's happened to Palestinians who were in Israel.
Yeah.
Because the first one was Nakba.
Yeah. And this would be a second Nakba. Just flat out.
And of course, that Nakba, from what I understand, translates into catastrophe.
Yeah.
In
Arabic.
In Arabic, yeah. And basically what that was when the state of Israel was created, they had to do the exact same thing. And so basically people were forced off their land, out of their property, and left their home. So there's this thing where people wear the keys of the houses that they left around their necks because they expect to go back.
Yeah.
So whenever people are talking about this, which is the current situation in Gaza, that's what they're talking about. And what is now very interesting is, as I said before, I worked for the S&P in Westminster, and our party in Westminster from before the last election was one of the few parties of major parties that was talking about the disaster and how the reaction to the terrorist attack on October 7th was way beyond what's it called, commensurate.
Yeah, it was a non-commensurate, disproportionate.
It was incredibly disproportionate. They're using water, they're using food as tools of war for collective punishment.
Well, and that's the thing. Collective punishment is a war crime. It has been understood to be a war crime. When the German army was occupying Greece during World War II, and they decided that in order to deal with the fact that many Greeks didn't want them there and kept shooting SS men and that kind of thing, that they would just liquidate whole villages, to encourage the others, right? Everyone knew, oh no, this is a war crime. Oh, this is the deliberate extermination of civilians in order to terrorize a population. That's not cool, And similarly, in the Soviet Union, when Stalin did the same thing, when, the Holodomor, for example, very much collective punishment of the Ukrainians for having had the temerity to think that they could have their own states.
Exactly.
And obviously I'm reaching for, I'm reaching for some of the most dark moments in the 20th century. I don't mean to say that this is the same in the sense of scale, but in the sense of the fundamental fact that you are, in the case of the Netanyahu government, using your control over food and water to deliberately threaten the lives of civilians in order to obtain your political goals. Yeah, it's a war crime. It just is.
And so what the issue is that for the past several almost years now, It's this the October 7th attack happened in 2023, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we are now in 2025. And between 2023 and basically this week, the international community, bar South Africa, and various political parties around the world have all been very much supportive of Israel and what they call the right for it to defend itself. And
which, for the record, every state has. Every individual has a right of self-defense.
Exactly.
That's absolutely true.
There's nothing wrong with the concept of self-defense.
Yep. And
that line has been used by both White House administrations and by both UK governments over the past nearly 2 years.
Yep.
But something changed this week. This is why we're talking about it. This week, it was like something snapped, and therefore the world almost spun on a dime, or a pence, if you will. And they basically said, what the hell's going on? We can no longer support you. You need to turn around. You need to stop this immediately.
Yep.
And that's when Netanyahu effectively declared, we're taking over Gaza. We're going in there, guns blazing. We're going to take over everything. What are you going to do to stop us?
Yep. And also pictures started coming out of, I mean, what can you say? Babies who are literally starving to death.
Starving children. And the UN declared that I think 14,000 babies were about to die in Gaza because of the blocking of aid. And Israel argues that, these aid blocks and the reason that they're treating Gaza the way it is because that Hamas...
seizes the aid trucks, and then...
They're seizing the aid trucks, but there's also that they're breaching the ceasefire agreements and various other reasons.
Right.
And in exchange for that, Israel says, it's totally cool. We're gonna starve some kids and that'll get the
that'll force Hamas to
rolling.
And again, I mean, I could direct people to the definition of collective punishment, and also point out that those babies who are starving to death, I don't think they have voting rights in the Hamas government. I don't think that they're a really necessarily powerful interest group.
Powerful constituency.
Yeah, in Hamas.
Within Gaza.
Yeah, as a political institution.
So what was interesting about what happened this week, though, is that David Lammy, and here's a bit of inside baseball, as we say in America. So when the UK government, when they're asked to make they're asked to do a question in the Commons, and sometimes they don't know the question's coming, or they can make a statement. Whenever there's a question or a statement on Gaza that is hard for the government to respond to, for example, earlier this year, the UK government said they were banning some types of military weaponry or military aid going to Israel, some types. Anytime there's a conversation about that, they send in a guy named Hamish Falconer, who is an MP. He's a secretary. He's a minister in the Foreign Office.
Okay,
and he's basically going to be a punching bag to basically take all of the rage from members of Parliament, which is increasing since 2023, about what's going on, what Israel's doing to Gaza.
Yeah.
But whenever there's something good, David Lammy the foreign secretary. He runs up to the dispatch box and he says, guys, listen, I got some good news for you. So earlier this week, we're recording on the 24th of May here. David Lammy came to the dispatch box and basically he put his entire full chest behind condemning Israel for what they were saying and what they were doing. And he and the United Kingdom has suspended free trade talks with Israel, and they hauled in the Israeli ambassador to effectively yell at her and figure out what they were doing there, because obviously the UK has been full-fledged behind Israel since 2023, despite what it's doing across Gaza. And now it seems like everyone has changed their minds. And I think the reason is simply because Israel has now said it out loud. We're going in and we're wiping everything out and we're gonna take it over.
The thing is, there is some indication that the global pushback is having at least some effect. Apparently, a few days ago, Netanyahu did announce that they were going to be allowing some food and water to get into Gaza. And for the record, those of you sort of keeping track at home, Gaza is an importer of food and water.
Yeah.
It's not a self-sustaining place for food and water, right? So before October 7th, right, before all of this began, you would have, I think, what was it, like hundreds of trucks basically going in every day.
Yeah, hundreds of trucks.
Yeah, and here they're talking about the amount that Netanyahu is willing to let in comes to, I think, about 1% of the amount of trucks that were entering Gaza providing aid before October 7th. So that's, kind of an indication of just how bad this situation is. And from what I'm hearing, one of the reasons why Netanyahu was willing to do this incredibly, incredibly small thing that is a drop in the bucket in terms of preventing babies from starving to death and what have you, is that apparently Republican senators were starting to tell him, we can't back this.
Right.
That this is, we can't have 14,000 babies dying with pictures.
With pictures.
So Netanyahu apparently was quite clear that he's only doing this because, Republican senators are getting all squishy.
And the only reason this is happening is because Trump is in office.
Well,
again, the people voted for Trump, specifically Dearborn, Michigan, specifically some in the Muslim and Arab communities, because they said that they believed that Trump would theoretically do better, or they wanted to punish Democrats.
He'd wave his hands to get a ceasefire. And if you're the kind of person who listened to what he was saying during the election and believed him,
well,
you would think that he would be someone who just wouldn't take any crap and would put down the law and he would end this. And the problem was Biden back in Israel to the hilt, which he did.
Yeah.
He did. He was deeply ineffective at trying to leverage that towards any kind of actual ceasefire.
Yeah, and we could talk about that we could talk about that later because it was an election year.
Well, that's the thing.
But just to clarify one thing, there used to be 500 trucks going into Gaza every day, and now there's only apparently the UN has received approval for about 100 trucks.
Okay, all right, so that's more like 20%.
So it's 20%.
That's a bigger drop in the bucket.
And also, Israel doesn't let independent reporters come in to view these things. So whenever they make a claim, I'm not saying that it's fake, but I'm saying that if you're going to claim that something is happening but not let in international reporters to view it, then it's very difficult for people to believe everything that you say without just on the face of what you're saying. That applies to every country in the world. If Russia said that everything is fine, everybody's happy, and everybody's voting for me, but don't go to polling stations and don't ask any Russians.
Everything is fine. Don't look behind the curtain. Thank you.
Exactly.
I'm going to quote Ronald Reagan for, I think, the first time in my life, and say, trust but verify.
Trust but verify, which is also a note from the movie Chernobyl. So, that's kind of where we are with what's going on with Gaza and our, limited capacity of understanding what's happening in that area. And, this is one of many human tragedies that are happening around the world. I believe there's one in Sudan. I believe there's one in Congo. But you know where there's not one? Yeah. South Africa.
On the list of places where there is no genocide, South Africa is pretty high on the list of places in which there is no genocide.
But of course, the dear leader, the one and only, the true son, Donald Trump, has given free passes to 57 white Afrikaners who have claimed that there's a genocide because it's really hard for the whites in South Africa.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. Because they, so all joking aside, crime is big in South Africa.
Yeah, it is.
It is a society in which murder is much more common than it is in other places on the earth. And that sucks.
Yeah,
that is a sucky thing.
That is wild.
It is not a situation where white people are disproportionately likely to be murdered, though.
Yeah.
So, the idea that, because some white people have been murdered, therefore there is a white genocide happening. Therefore, you must obviously bring in 57 Afrikaners immediately to the United States. Whereas, the Palestinians are literally being genocided, but also we in no circumstances will accept any Palestinians coming in to the United States. I think, I don't know, it seems like that's not principled, Chris?
I would say it's not principled, and I did make one mistake. It was 59, not 57.
59!
So 59. And I mean, and just briefly, the president of South Africa was in the White House, and of course, Trump dragged out, again, because Trump likes tactile things. He likes physical things.
He does. He doesn't have a computer.
He does. Everything's computer.
Everything has to be printed out for him.
Do you know that joke?
Yeah.
Everything's computer.
Oh,
basically this is just a confected story, by the way. And it of course, since Donald Trump seemingly only reads or is talked to by either Fox News or worse, he believes it without question.
Well, apparently, one of the reasons why he's so into believing that this is happening is that Elon Musk has been telling him that it has been happening. In fact, he was very clear before he started launching into his absurd attacks on the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, that the reason he was doing this because Elon asked him to, which is
wild.
That's just great.
This is wild.
It's fine. It's fine to have your Nazi South African dickhead friend tell you what to say to the president of South Africa,
and for you not to, and for nobody else in the room to know what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
So, that's where we are with what's happening with Gaza and a little bit of South Africa and South African refugees. But I think we'll take a little break here, and then we're going to talk about what's going on with the Supreme Court in America.
Yeah, we got some stuff to talk about.
All right. Well, I'll try to keep Patrick down to 30 minutes. Right. We'll be right back.
Do your best.
And we're back.
Welcome back from that delightful break. It was the pause that refreshes.
It was the pause from the puppies who paws your face.
Indeed.
Oh, it was so nice. We needed a little break from all of that. So Patrick has been bugging me about this SCOTUS ruling about independent agencies. Yeah. So why don't you take it away? And at the right point, I'm going to jump in.
Okay. That is a very good idea.
How about that?
All right.
Okay.
Well, now, for the record, the reason why I've been hounding Chris about this, and I have been, is that I know that if there's one thing that really sells on the internet, it is discussions of Supreme Court precedents.
Yo.
And I hear you, people. I hear you, and I'm here for you.
This is going to be huge for our demographic.
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to be huge for the algorithm.
Oh, yeah. No,
SCOTUS rulings.
YouTube's going to love us. So, if you've been paying attention to Supreme Court rulings, and why wouldn't you, then you may have heard about the recent ruling in the case of Trump v. Wilcox. Now, this is, you're going to hear a lot about this, basically. The general idea is this. Two government employees named Wilcox and Harris, who were respectively on the National Labor Relations Board and the Merit Systems Protection Board, were recently fired by Donald Trump. And this is weird. The thing is, both the NLRB and the Merit Systems Protection Boards, MSPB, both of them were created by Congress. And in the legislation that created them, it was specifically stated that while the president can nominate people to sit on these boards, that people who are on the board can only be removed by the president in certain circumstances. For example, for misconduct in office, for incompetence, things like this.
That all makes sense, of course, because exactly, right? You don't want to have to go through a huge congressional hearing if you find out that the person's a murderer.
Well, that's the thing, right? Clearly, you want to have the president to be able to act decisively in a situation like that. But why would the Congress limit the president's ability to fire people? Well, the reason is that these boards and others like them were specifically created to be independent agencies. Agencies where they're not simply carrying out the will of the president. Instead, they exist to do something else. In the case of the NLRB, their job there is to basically take a look at, union elections, make sure that they're run correctly, make sure that corporations aren't retaliating against people for exercising their rights to join a union.
All seemingly important stuff.
Well, that's the thing, right? Other types of protected boards, the MSPB, that's there to make sure that government employees who are civil servants, who are professional civil servants, that they're not being hired and fired on the basis of their political beliefs, but on the basis of whether or not they do their jobs right.
Oh,
It's a crazy idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
We see what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
We see what's happening.
Yeah. And of course, there are other boards as well that are similarly set up. One famous one you might have heard of called the Federal Reserve.
The Federal Reserve.
The Fed. Them guys.
Oh, the thing that everybody thinks they know everything about, but know nothing about.
Exactly. That particular one. So yeah, they're the people who control the money supply. The ones who basically act to influence the interest rate that the government borrows at, that the rest of us have to borrow at. It's really important stuff. And what sets all these independent agencies apart, aside from the fact that Congress created them to be insulated from political pressure by the president, is that they all do something that isn't just about using executive power. They usually have some kind of judicial or legislative function. That is, their job isn't just to do what the president says. Their job is to determine whether or not the rules have been followed, right? So if, for example, you're talking about the National Labor Relations Board, let's say there's a union election and the workers vote to unionize, and the company feels that that election was, done in a way that was improper, they might appeal to the NLRB, and the NLRB might take a look and decide whether or not the election was valid. That's not an executive function. That's judicial, right?
Yeah.
Because they're determining what the facts are and whether or not the law has been complied with. If you're talking about, the Fed, for example, the Fed is doing things like setting interest rates, right? They're determining, using their expertise to determine what they can do to make sure that the economy doesn't boil over or fall into a depression.
And more importantly, the Fed makes sure that the financial, the fiscal, and economic decisions taken are more or less free from political influence.
Which you really kind of want.
And fun note, the Bank of England wasn't independent until the late 90s when Gordon Brown, as chancellor in the Labour government in 97, basically released them from the control of the chancellor. So it's a very big deal to have that power not in the hands of the government, because imagine if you're the government, you could just say, oh yeah, so I don't want interest rates to be high just before an election.
Right, exactly. Maybe we just drop the interest rates, goose the economy, it's going to be great. And in fact, that's exactly what Richard Nixon did right before his re-election in 1972. And the funny thing is about that is that it caused a huge bout of inflation, kind of wrecked the American economy for a little bit there. It was a really perfect example of why you don't necessarily want presidents doing things like that, right?
And here we are.
Yeah. So that's the background. Now, Donald Trump purported to fire Wilcox and Harris and explicitly said that he has no reason for it. That they haven't
murdered anybody.
Nope, haven't murdered anyone. No misconduct in office. No incompetence. Nothing like that. Just they aren't going to do what Trump wants them to do.
They aren't his people.
Yeah, they're too insulated. You see.
Yeah.
So obviously, Wilcox and Harris, they went to their lawyers. Their lawyers said, "Well, under the law, he can't do that. Under the law, you haven't been fired." So obviously, this is a big problem. So they sue. The courts take a look at this, and while the courts are figuring out the official merits of it, the question was, what happens to Wilcox and Harris? Do they not get to go to work now? Do they not get paid? Does the president get to put someone else in there when the president may not even have the power to do what he just did in the first place? So Wilcox and Harris then asked for what's called a restraining order. I think a TRO in this case.
Oh, right.
And the idea there is that the courts will say, all right, well, if we're going to give this kind of injunction on your behalf, then we're going to want to know, number one, are you likely to succeed on the merits? If you are, then where's the balance of difficulties fall in this, right? Which side gets hurt more if we decide their way or against them while this thing is taking place, while the trial is happening? Now, they won these restraining orders. They were able to get their jobs back while this works its way through the courts. And again, on the basis that on the merits of the law as it stands, the president doesn't have this power, right?
Because that's the law.
Exactly. That's the law passed by Congress, signed by the president, not this president, but
obviously not.
Exactly. And the Supreme Court has held under Humphries' Executor in the 1930s.
1935.
Yeah, that this is a perfectly constitutional thing for Congress to do. It has the power to do this. And the real issue is whether or not the executive, whether or not the boards in question do something other than purely executive stuff. Do they have any judicial functions? Do they have any legislative functions? Or are they purely, tools of the president's will as the chief executive?
Right.
So the NLRB, no doubt it has these other functions. The MSPB absolutely has these other functions. The Fed absolutely has these other functions. The whole point of these independent agencies is that they have more than purely executive functions. So as far as the law is concerned, precedent is concerned, all of that, yeah, Trump's going down in flames.
It would be clear on the face of it that it's an unwinnable case.
Well, absolutely, right?
However,
this brings us to the current Supreme Court.
They were doing so well.
I know. They had quite a few reasonable rulings there where it seemed like, maybe Amy Coney Barrett wasn't going to merrily march along towards the fascist death camps. But apparently, I don't know, she didn't take her sane pills today. So SCOTUS has basically ruled that Wilcox and Harris have to lose their jobs while the case proceeds on the merits. And you might be saying to yourself, okay, well, they haven't decided on the merits. It's still going to go forward. They could still rule in accordance with the law, right? They're not going to overturn 100 years almost of jurisprudence, right?
Well,
yeah. And then this is where I get to break all of your hearts, my friends. What they did was they said, while we're not ruling on the merits underlying this, we think that it's likely that Trump will be able to show that the NLRB and the MSPB have significant executive functions. In fact, I am going to quote directly from the ruling, if I can get my phone to open, which is actually, it's not doing so great.
And he's doing that just as I'm taking a sip of water.
Exactly. So this is really the dead air problem.
Yeah, no, it's not the dead air problem. We've sorted it out. I've had my sip of water, and okay. Patrick, I believe, has found.
I have found it. The
relevant section.
So I'm going to. The stay reflects our judgment that the government is likely to show that both the NLRB and MSPB exercise considerable executive power. The thing is...
Why don't you translate that into English?
Yeah, okay. So, in other words, they do things that the executive does. Trump will probably be able to show that these agencies, they do some executive stuff, right? The thing is, that's not the legal test for whether or not Trump's going to succeed on the merits. The test is whether or not they do things that aren't executive as well. So it's a little bit as if what they're saying is, the law says that you can't be fired if you've got an apple or a pear in your pocket. And then the Supreme Court has sort of decided that, well, actually, the real question is, do you have a kiwi? So it's just sort of like, it's that's not the question. That's not how the law works. This is a wild thing for the Supreme Court to have said. Because what they're doing then is effectively overruling this case, Humphries Executive, from 1935. And that is 90 years old. That has been good law for 90 years. And they're overruling it without hearing any arguments, without actually hearing a case on it, without being briefed by the two sides' lawyers. Just in the shadow docket, like you do, just saying, that law, never mind, it's not law anymore. We've decided because, reasons, and then not giving any reasons, which is crazy pants. That's not what judges do. That's not how law works, right?
Right.
It gets worse.
Oh my God.
I know.
Sweet.
Right? You might be saying to yourself, well, okay, so they're just going to say the president can fire anybody he wants, and there's no such thing as an independent agency, and then that's that, right? So he could just fire the head of the Fed and put in his own dude.
Pyle, who has been trying to put in who, by the way, he appointed Jerome.
He appointed him in the first place. Yep. And Powell, I think his term is up next year. Is it? Or, Trump would theoretically just be able to wait him out and then put someone in his place. But of course, Trump doesn't want that. He wants someone who'll do what he wants when he wants him to do it, which is right now. So you would think, okay, well, that's kind of dangerous. And of course it would be, because if Trump can just sort of demand, at the same time that he's hiking up tariffs, as he's causing no end of craziness in the bond market, and also potentially sparking a worldwide recession.
Yeah.
If then he can just sort of say, oh, and also I'm just going to control the interest rate and decide, you know what, never mind, interest rates is 0%. Have fun with, massive inflation, everybody.
Deal with that. Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that might make bond markets really quite scared indeed.
Well, that would be scary. I mean, but the Supreme Court has just allowed him to get rid of all independent agency chairs, right?
Well, except for the Federal Reserve.
Wait, what?
I know.
What?
Yeah. So
no way.
I know you're thinking to yourself, okay. Well, the Supreme Court doesn't have a reason, right? I mean, they can't just make it up as they go along. This isn't Calvin Ball, right? Except that it absolutely is. What they've decided is that because the Federal Reserve has...
I happen to see this quote because it has its roots with the second United States bank.
Yeah, because the founders had intended there to be a U.S. bank when they wrote the Constitution, that therefore they could create an independent Federal Reserve in the 1910s, and that is something that somehow gets grandfathered in, unlike all the other independent agencies that Congress created, which it can't do, even though it can do it when it's the Fed, but it can't do it when it's not the Fed because reasons. And again, without giving any reasons.
So it's pretty clear then.
Yeah, they're just making it up as they go along. It's
not just making up as they go along. It's the theory that we've been talking about for almost every episode now. It's that the people at the very top, the people who are benefiting from Trump, the MAGA movement, who happen to be extortionately wealthy, extravagantly wealthy.
Yep.
They're like, don't mess with the money, mess with people, don't mess with money. And so when Trump started messing with money, you could see the massive pushback, the huge wave of pushback from all corners. Even Fox News was having to say the truth. For a while, but here we are. It's he's messing with labor, and he's messing with the independence of agencies, of agency workers, or effectively, from what I understand, that what was the MPB thing?
The Merit Service Protection Board.
The Merit Service Protection Board, which effectively prevents you from getting fired for not wearing a MAGA hat, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, to get rid of that means that you could fill the civil service with a bunch of MAGA shamans, right? Yeah. Because they're going to do whatever they say, and if they have a little bit of power, you can control the country through the executive branch. And getting rid of those two particular jobs means that you can create horrible labor laws or ensure that unions are ineffective.
Oh yeah.
And then the other one,
absolutely destroy unions in the United States.
And the other one, you can make sure that in order to get a job as a janitor in a federal building, they can ask for who you voted for in the past 4 elections.
Yeah.
And you can't complain to anybody.
The thing is, Trump has a lot of form on this as well. After all, those attacks that he made against those white shoe law firms, right? Like Paul Weiss and what have you, where he's basically said, well, because I don't like the clients that you take, you're not allowed to have anything to do with the federal government. You're not allowed in any federal buildings anymore, which is insane and highly unconstitutional.
Yeah.
And in fact, they just lost that case against Chris, I can't remember the name of the law firm.
But I don't know it either.
Yeah, fair enough. But either way, once again, they've gone down in flames the second anyone has pushed back on this. The courts are very clear that Trump has been consistently breaking the law, violating the Constitution in order to punish people for speech that he doesn't like. And if he can do that with the bureaucracy, with the people who actually make the government run, replace all the people who know what they're doing with people who will just do what he says.
That's what they're told.
Well, how does America keep working under those circumstances? Like, it's not like other countries haven't tried doing that, right? Look at China during the Cultural Revolution.
Sure.
That worked out great.
Sure.
Right? Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, I mean, but the problem is, it's small things that, because there's so much going on, it's hard to take note of it. And more importantly, this is some of this is kind of complicated, but they're trying very hard to create their own personal state and a cult of personality around Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So the fact that, at least they're still going to hear the case. I know that you're very upset, that you're down on the fact that they've obviously said they're not going to rule in favor of the 2 people who were fired. But they're still going to hear the case on its merits, and the government's still going to have to effectively try to prove its point. So it seems like we're at a way station as opposed to the end.
I mean, it's true that Trump has not yet gotten the court to officially rule that he can seize control of all the independent agencies. But, and maybe the Supreme Court will get enough pushback on this that the 6 Republican-appointed judges on that court, and maybe 2 of them, probably Barrett and Roberts, if anybody, will suddenly realize, oh, no, we actually can't do this, because if we do this, we're going to reveal ourselves to be absolute, scabs. Yeah. Just like 100% shills. It's
a big maybe. It's a big maybe.
Well, yeah, but it's the kind of thing that really should shatter the Supreme Court's reputation as being anything other than basically like the, I don't know, like the freaking Supreme Soviet, the party apparatus that will
protect the leadership, protect the executive, ensure that the state is above the people.
Well, exactly. So
I mean, and this is the
difference.
Whatever
they are, they're not judges.
Exactly. Yeah, the clerics.
Yeah.
But that, every case like this now is, because the cases that Donald Trump are bringing, from what I understand, are on the face of them just dumb, and they shouldn't. We shouldn't have had them at the Supreme Court, but they consistently make it there.
Yep.
So I think we're going to leave it there for now.
Probably a good idea.
Yeah, because we have 1 or 2 more things to talk about, and we'll be right back. And we're back.
Yep. Once again, a lovely pause. I feel better. I've shook out the sillies.
He shook out the sillies.
Yeah, man.
And that pause is brought to you by Paul Atreides.
His name is the only killing word you'll ever need.
All right. Okay, so we're going to talk about really quickly here some interesting things that have been going on over the past few weeks. But for me, I'm going to talk about Harvard, a university that I am not affiliated with at all. I did not go to Harvard.
I did not go to Harvard.
We went to the Florida State University.
Yeah.
Which is not Harvard. But you have actually, I believe the president of Florida State actually was the head of research at Harvard. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah, no, we're not. Yeah, I mean, we're not Harvard because we're not snooty.
Yeah, exactly.
We're good old down to earth Southern boys.
But I mean, Southern in the sense of South Florida.
You're from South Florida. I lived in Tallahassee, which is still the South. The South officially stops at Orlando and Tampa.
Yeah, south of Orlando, you're really. Like,
you're in your own different country.
Exactly. It's a whole new shade of weirdness.
So over the past several weeks and months, the Trump administration has been going after universities. They went after Columbia because of the the pro-Palestinian protests.
Yep.
And they started going after Harvard. And, of course, Columbia capitulated. We talked about this on past podcasts.
Columbia folded like Superman on laundry day.
You love that phrase.
I do. I'm going to use it again because they're going to keep being cowards, Chris.
Yeah, they were telling all of their international students, take out everything that's anti-Trump, anything political, because we can't protect you. That was the head of the journalism school. Mm-hmm. So they've been, they have collapsed into a complete, dump of their own. But Harvard has resisted the big far right push to, really mollify all universities, because the worst thing for fascism is an educated populace. And where do you educate people? At universities. That's why you have people like Charlie Kirk and these fascists running around universities saying, women, stop going to university and get back into bed and get into the bedroom. Men, stop, playing video games. Men, stop trying to learn and just get to work in the factories and the mills.
Exactly.
Because, the billionaires who sponsor Charlie Kirk and they sponsor Turning Point and all these other places, they just want to get the plebs back in the streets and back in the fields so they can continue to make their
that's the thing
exorbitant amounts of money.
For these kinds of for these billionaires, right? The purpose of education is to train people to work for them. Whereas for I don't know, people who are like into education, they kind of see education as a way to like train you to think for yourself and to be able to do your own research without becoming completely insane. And, to be if you're an educated person to the point where you know how society works, you can form your own opinions and decide whether or not a politician's lying to you and actually make them work in your interests.
Which is why the voting demographics often show that people who have some modicum of education, of higher education, don't vote for the right-wing candidate. They don't vote for Trump.
Yeah.
White uneducated men, by and large, will vote for Trump.
Yeah.
But and Trump polls very well amongst white people in America, but with the exception of one group.
Yeah.
Educated white women.
Yeah.
It's the exact opposite. So
Yeah.
all the large groups of white people in America will vote for Trump, but educated white women will actively vote against him.
Yeah.
Which proves the point.
Yeah.
Which proves the point that you've had the time to learn, you've had your beliefs challenged, and now you're just going to say, no, we don't want any of that. So the reason for bringing it up is because Trump has really ramped up the attacks. Now, first off, he was cutting off aid, funding to the school to the tune of $2.2 billion that he cut off.
Yeah.
And it was unclear if he had the right to just unilaterally do this. Again,
I mean,
the leader doing something unilaterally, which the far right is like, thank God that the president can do things without any oversight.
Exactly. Because, they want a Caesar, they want a dictator, they want a king. And for the record, legally speaking, at least in terms of, the law, whatever that is these days. But in terms of the law, no, the president can't just sort of decide,
Snap his fingers.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. He can't just say, I'm taking away, your government funding because I don't like what you say, because that is a violation of the First Amendment.
Yeah. From what I understand, the right wing of American politics are big fans of the Constitution and amendments.
Oh, you would think. You would think.
However, they're only really a big fan of the second one.
Yeah, no. See, the thing is, here's how the right wing thinks about freedom of speech, Chris.
Yeah.
Because if you say that I am wrong, then you are oppressing me.
That's correct.
You are canceling me.
That's right.
And that is a violation of my First Amendment rights.
That's right.
If I, as the U.S. government, throw you in jail because you said something I didn't like, and take away your rights
and ship you to a different country,
then that's freedom, Chris. That
is freedom. That's just the right of the president, and the president's will should be enacted without question always.
Mm-hmm.
So most recently, the Trump administration, and this is wild, has basically said Harvard can get no more foreign students, and they have tried to effectively remove the ability for Harvard to get visas.
Well, now, Chris, that's not quite fair.
What?
That's not quite fair.
Not fair. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Educate me here.
Well, the thing is, you're making it sound like he's saying that they can't have any more foreign students. Like, they can't bring any more in. When in reality, they're saying that every foreign student who's at Harvard right now has to move to another university or get deported from the country.
That is right. I forgot about that part.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not just you can't bring in foreign students, it's that you cannot have foreign students.
So every foreign student, everyone from around the world who is currently studying at Harvard, who is not a U.S. citizen, is now faced with the situation of either they have to somehow find another university to transfer to
within a week,
or they're thrown out of the country, and all of a sudden, all the money that they've spent
at Harvard,
all that money has been totally frickin' wasted. So the thing is, this is clearly unconstitutional. It's fantastically illegal. The courts are not going to let this happen because they can't possibly do that. Even the Supreme Court, I would be shocked if they were to let this one pass, because this threatens America's leadership. In terms of
higher education leadership, we're talking about research, we're talking about AI, we're talking about
this is something that threatens the United States on a fundamental level.
And you know who loved this? Who loved Trump's action?
Oh,
China.
Oh, 100%.
They are licking their lips, saying, "Hey, you can't study in America. Why don't you just come to China?
Yeah,
and we'll happily take your ideas."
I mean, to be fair, you know who else is licking their lips?
Who else?
Every university in Europe and Great Britain.
That's true.
Every last one of them's got to be like, "Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like, we can get foreign students again? Hooray!"
I mean, imagine the capacity for them is to say, "Oh, well, we could just create a Harvard entry line at Oxford, or hell, at Queen Mary, or at any of the universities out there, Edinburgh, Glasgow, St. Andrews.
Exactly.
Because and this is first off a tactic to both quiet and hobble American universities, which is only going to hurt the country. Yeah. So that's one thing that is wild, and Trump has just gone absolutely ham. One of the things that he wanted right off the bat was that he wanted Harvard to appoint a political officer inside the school so that they could oversee what Harvard was teaching. This is a real thing. I will pull it up. Yeah. And if I'm wrong, I'll correct it next week. But I'm fairly confident.
I have seen reference to this as well. That this was part of the ask.
Yeah. To get the funding.
Yeah. Exactly.
The $2.2 billion.
So they keep using the Soviet playbook. They keep doing the things that the Soviet Union did. Political freaking commissars. My God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're going to turn Harvard into the Hunt for the Red October with Tim Curry in the background trying to make sure that Sean Connery isn't going to steal the shit.
That was Tim Curry, wasn't it?
It was Tim Curry. He was the political commissar.
He was the political commissar. Oh, man.
Yeah. But you see what we're saying. This is insane. This is not America. This is not freedom. This is the definition of fascism.
No, this is them literally. I mean, the thing is, with the Trump administration attempting to seize control of all elements of the government, and don't forget, in the United States system, the government is not just the president. The government is the president and the Congress and the Supreme Courts. That they
three co-equal branches of government.
Exactly.
The president is not king.
Yeah.
Specifically, America did not create a system where one person was supposed to be in control of the whole country. That's the whole reason for the war.
Yeah.
The whole reason for the war.
Honestly, Chris, like if someone was going to ask me, okay, can you just lay out for me exactly why what Trump is doing is a bad idea? The best thing I would tell that person is go read the Federalist Papers.
Go read the Federalist Papers.
Like, they're pretty well written. Hamilton, he knew his way around a pen, I'm just going to say.
Yeah.
Like half of those essays are explicitly about how the Constitution will never let someone like Trump gain power.
Yeah. And yet here we are. So that's what we're doing with the Harvard situation. Do you want to briefly talk about tariffs?
I think we'll talk about tariffs real quick. It's Liberation Day all over again. Woo! Congratulations, people.
Here we go.
It's like Liberation Day. It's like Groundhog's Day, but without Bill Murray.
Without Bill Murray, no shadow, no sun.
So Donald Trump has announced that he is instituting 50% tariffs on Europe, and that these 50% tariffs on European goods. This is going to force people to build factories inside the United States, and then you could buy from the United States, and because everyone's so unfair to us, totally unfair, blah, blah, blah. And it's great. It's great because, if there's one thing that Americans really want, it's to eat more American cheese.
I mean, again, here we are with this tariff nonsense. Again, we're going to raise 50% tariffs so that we do that you can create and produce more in America. You got to build the factories first. You've got to replace the thing that you're trying to keep out before you bring in the tariff.
That's the thing.
The tariff doesn't create the market, doesn't create the production centers. So if you want a Jaguar, the UK is not the EU, but if you want Italian clothes or German food or French wine or Spanish jamon iberico. I mean, I know we're being very, la-di-da first class here, but I'm sure we get tons of stuff from the EU that is not, jamon iberico. I mean, there's a reason why we have a trade deficit with them. So the whole point is this nonsense of once we put in the tariff, Americans will just get back into the factories. The factories are still there. The factories are just robotic.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. So it's going to be a situation where even if it did work, it would not mean a huge increase in employment in the United States. It would just mean everyone's paying more money for the same amount of shit.
And for less of it, because obviously it's going to be harder to get it into the country.
And what's really great is that every American company that competes with a European import, right?
Yeah.
What Donald Trump has just said to them is, hey guys, you get to raise your prices by 50%.
Absolutely.
Because now they can either keep their prices the same and, they'll get more sales and that's great, or they can jack up the prices and also get more sales. And that's more money, you see.
And that's more money for them. I mean...
they're not being greedy. That's just what any business would do when you do this.
Why would you undersell yourself?
Well, exactly. So, one thing I always heard from conservatives growing up is businesses aren't charities.
Tell me about it.
And they're right. Businesses aren't charities, right? So, why would we expect that they would do anything other than jack up their prices 50%? when Donald Trump institutes a 50% tariff on European goods. So it's not a situation where all of a sudden we're going to be able to, just switch to cheap American-made stuff. We'll be switching to expensive American-made stuff.
Yeah, there's a way to think about it as well. So if you go to the grocery store, and let's say you don't like wine, but you like beer, the beers that will be affected are Heineken, Amstel Light, any German beer like Beck's. If they sell Estela Galicia or any Spanish, any Spanish beer, any Czech beer. So basically, if you see a foreign beer that you normally get, you think,
Pilsner
I'll pay a little bit, Pilsner or Urquell, a little bit more for that, right? Because it tastes better, and it is better. Because America killed off its beer industry during the Prohibition.
I will say that American beer has gotten a lot better.
It has gotten
since the 1990s. There's some real good stuff out there. Yeah, but it ain't Bud and it ain't Coors.
Yeah,
and it's probably not Schlitz either. I don't know what they're up to these days.
Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Yeah, exactly.
but basically, look at those things and say, am I willing to pay double or 50% more for it? Right? Because that's what the idea is right now, unless the EU and the US can come to some sort of deal. Again, it's messing around with the world economy for effectively shits and giggles.
Yep.
Because it's just like with Brexit. You can't just build a port. You have to build that port. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It takes time and planning.
And it means that the people who are putting in the money to build it, the people who are investing that money, they need to believe that circumstance is going to keep going long enough for them to recoup that money and make a profit, right?
Right.
And the thing is, Donald Trump has made it very clear what he says today means nothing for what he'll do tomorrow.
Absolutely.
So how can you possibly trust that 50% tariff is going to be there for longer than a week, or at least long enough for you to spend years building a factory, hiring people, getting supply lines set up, getting distribution set up, being able to get markets to sell stuff to, without Donald Trump just saying, you know what, this is a bad idea. Never mind, I'm dropping it down to 10% again. Or you know what, I'm going to spike it up to 75%, but only on every alternate Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. And how do you plan an economy like that, or how do you plan any business like that? So we'll leave it there because I'm sure we'll come back to it again.
And there's one last big thing that I think you wanted to talk about, right?
There is. So it's kind of an all-encompassing thing. So last week, or the last episode, I believe we talked about reform. Reform is still polling very high in the United Kingdom. They're still getting about 30% of the vote, sometimes 29, sometimes 28, but they're above everybody else right now in a UK-wide polling. In Scotland, because as I said, I work for the SNP in Westminster. Scotland, the SNP is still ahead, but Reform is making massive gains. So obviously they're a big force, but it's in general. You see across the world that the right wing is still relatively popular. Yeah. With specific groups of people like young men. But the question that I have for the last bit of the discussion is, what does the left do? So in America, we have AOC and Bernie. They were going off doing their thing. You got Hakeem Jeffries. Hakeem Jeffries.
Hakeem Jeffries.
Hakeem Jeffries, who is the Speaker.
No, it's not Speaker of the House. Sorry, he's a Democratic majority leader. Yeah,
he's the minority leader in the House of Representatives. I was actually thinking about Cory Booker. Cory Booker did his filibuster, which was, it was a 24-hour speech. Maybe think 24, 25-hour speech.
Yeah, it was impressive, and it was a good example of how to seize control of the narrative for a little bit.
Yeah, the narrative was all about him and how he got himself to do it. And you see little bits here, little bits there, but in America, for example, the Democrats are still struggling.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure individuals will be fine, but as a party, it's going to be difficult to see how they win the next election unless they have somebody who's really transformative in office. And then in the UK, people voted for change, and they voted for change, and the party that literally said change on the front of it was the Labour Party. Yeah. And the Labour Party have been doing tons of things that are highly unpopular with literally everyone, like taking away the winter fuel payment. Which we've talked about before on this podcast. The Labour government said, "Oh, you know what? those pensioners, those old people, they make a bit too much money. They got far too much money in their pockets. So we're going to take away the payment that keeps them warm in the winter, because we're sure that some of them are rich enough to pay for it themselves.
Yeah.
So we're going to make it harder for them to get it and make sure that fewer old people are able to stay warm in the winter. We are the Labor Party, and we are on the left.
Everything has changed because we're implementing right-wing policies. And how's that been working out for them, Chris?
It's not working out for them, and
funny.
And basically they are now behind the Reform Party, which is not a really political party. It's a business run by Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
So the question is, like, what Labor has done is what I think all left-wing parties want to do. And that's abandon the middle, effectively abandon the left, and go running towards the immigration argument. And I think that's the worst thing for them to do.
It is incredibly cack-handed, you know? And the funny thing is to see center-left parties again and again and again come to this weird decision that the way to beat a populist right-wing party is to be as middle of the road mush as possible, to try to ape the right wing as much as possible on social issues without doing anything on the economic front. It's so that they're pissing off the people who would vote for them normally, while also trying to compete with people who will not vote for them.
Yeah.
Competing with a party that is going to give them more of what those people want in the first place. Like, if you are competing with Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Right? And your business makes, let's say, some kind of super healthy water, right?
Yeah.
And you say to yourself, well, okay, Coca-Cola's got a lot of customers. I want some of those customers. What do those customers want? They want massive amounts of sugar. Great. Let's put massive amounts of sugar into our health water.
Right.
Yeah, and that way, you see, we're going to be able to take their customer base. Not as much as Coca-Cola, obviously. But, because we're the healthy alternative. But, a lot more. And I think you can see the problem with that kind of marketing. If you want the sugar water, Coca-Cola's got you covered.
Yeah.
If you want the healthy water, well, you can't drink that shit, can you?
That's a good analogy. Another way to look at it is like, why would you go for Diet Coke when you can get full fat Coke, as they call it here, or just regular Coke?
Okay, I'm someone who way prefers Diet Coke, actually, and so that's why my metaphor had to be way weirder.
But also, when you say something like, let's sugar up the health water,
yeah,
right? Coca-Cola can always increase the amount of sugar in
that
Coca-Cola.
Is very true.
There's basically, you can never outright the far right, and then we'll keep on saying this, and probably no one's going to hear it, but you have to go the other direction. Give people answers to solutions to the problems they face. You got this issue with, basically the only reason that Trump exists, and the only reason that reform exists, is because the far right and the right-wing press have been pushing the idea that anyone who doesn't look like you in your neighborhood is trying to kill you and take your job and eat your babies.
That they're the reason why you're having trouble seeing a doctor. They're the reason why your rent is so high.
Yeah.
They're the reason why the government doesn't seem to be able to function anymore.
Because there's too many of them in the country. And what these people don't seem to realize, these political parties on the left, is that you can keep on dancing at their tune and dance and basically following their narrative and letting them drag you down the path. Or you can say, here's how we're going to solve NHS waiting times. Yeah.
Here's how we're going to decrease rents. Here's how we're going to solve the housing crisis.
Cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that?
Here's the plan. Come forward with a plan and implement the plan and make sure everyone knows what the plan is and what part of the plan you're doing so that everyone can see whether or not you're doing it right.
I think that makes sense.
Rebuild trust, rebuild a sense of, that the government's there for a reason and not just to administer over things as they sort of bumble along.
Because people do know that the government is there for a reason, because every time that Trump tries to go after government, basically things that people get from the government, like Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, or anything like that, all of a sudden people are just starting to realize, oh, this actually affects me.
Yeah.
I can't let that happen because it actually affects me. And they have to start pulling back with their rhetoric because they're losing their own base, who most of them we rely on government assistance.
Well, yeah. And it's one of the really awful things about the United States at the moment is sort of seeing the fact that Trump got a majority of people who make less than $50,000 a year,
absolutely,
that it wasn't, not by massively, by like 2 percentage points over Harris, right, 50 to 48 basically, but still, that's absurd, right? Especially because Trump in power now is about to, if he can get this thing through the Senate, sign the big beautiful bill. Yes. Which is going to basically everyone who makes less than $50,000 a year is going to have to pay an extra $1,000 a year in increased taxes or decreased benefits.
But
in order to give people who make more than $50,000 a year a bunch of extra money, while also blowing out the deficit, borrowing over $3 trillion over the next 10 years.
Exactly. That's the purpose of these far right parties.
Yeah.
They're to get, average everyday people really riled up and upset about, the foreigner on your street. And it's always the foreigner on your street or the person who has a different color from you. Yep. And then you vote for them to get the foreigner off your street. They confect some huge issue and then they try to solve it by deporting people without due process. And in the meantime, just like when Trump's first term, the only thing that they're able to get passed is a tax bill that makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. Yep. Every time. It's every time.
Yeah, pretty consistent.
And yet people, because, not everybody has the ability to watch the news and to, read SCOTUS briefings or to care about what bills come out of Congress or even care about what's on
actual jobs.
Yeah, people have jobs just like we have jobs, right? Mm-hmm. Only our jobs happen to allow us to keep an eye on what's happening in the world. Most people don't. Mm-hmm. And so that's the problem, is that the right have a permanently complicated argument to make. It's easy to say the foreigner is taking your job. It's easier to say getting rid of them will make your life better.
Yep.
End of discussion. People simple. I don't need to hear anything else.
Yep.
And therefore the left has to figure out the simplest way to say what Harris is trying to say. She wanted to make it easier for people to build homes so that people could buy homes and then then that would help people get out of rent and into housing. But there's so many different things that you're fighting against on the left, and the right is, both from the political angle and also from the journalistic angle, they're pushing the narrative that it's just easier to understand.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I think part of it comes down to the fact that when you're a liar, you don't have to worry about telling the truth. That's the point about being a liar.
Yeah.
It's great. Part of the problem, though, I think, is that certainly in the case of the Democratic Party, and absolutely in the case of Keir Starmer and Labour's current iteration, both of them seem to be under the impression that it's bad to tell people what you're going to do in a way that is clear, where everything has to be sort of poll tested, everything has to be sort of carefully sculptured in such a way that no one's entirely certain what you're saying, and you haven't really promised anything in particular, and there's no clear plan exactly, other than trust us. We'll do the right thing. We'll do it right.
Yeah.
And then the second anything goes wrong, you're kind of screwed. As I think Rachel Reeves is increasingly finding, because I'm sorry, we're no longer in the world we were when Labour got elected. All the things where I understand why they were so desperate to not rock the boat, to not scare the bond markets, to try to make sure that everything is on an even keel. But also now we're in a situation where Trump is about to destroy the global economy, and we really need to be able to raise taxes from people who aren't,
already suffering
horribly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of wealthy people who can absolutely afford a little bit of a tax increase. And most of them are patriots who would understand that, in the circumstances, we kind of have to deal with this. We got to hunker down a little bit. We got to pay a little bit extra, get things back on track, and then we can talk about where to go from there.
And they have to be brave and say, they're going to get cut to shreds by the Daily Mail. They're going to get cut to shreds by the Telegraph. They're going to get cut to shreds by the Times.
Well, because they're not patriots, are they?
And because you're how dare you raise taxes? Why don't you just kick out the foreigners? That's the complication that the left will always have.
Yeah.
Is that you may need to raise taxes because Trump has done nonsense with tariffs. Mm-hmm. But that's a complicated thing to say, and all that Nigel Farage has to say is if elect me and I'll get rid of the foreigners and therefore everything's going to be fine. And people are well, that guy in there, he's wearing a good suit and I've seen him for 30 seconds on TV. Right. So I'm going to give him a shot. And I think
he doesn't talk like a politician.
He doesn't talk like a politician at all.
Yeah.
So, I think we just need to leave you with the concept of the question. What would the left need to do to convince you, if you're not already voting on the left, because even people who are on the left side of politics, they don't always vote left, as we saw in Dearborn, Michigan, as we saw across America. 20 million people stayed home and let Trump win.
Yep.
I mean, again, the left doesn't do itself any favors. The right will come out for Trump, and they'll know that he's going to be a dictator, but you know what? They think they're going to be on his side, and therefore it's going to be okay.
They think the dictator works for them.
Yeah, they think the dictator. Everybody thinks the dictator works
not right about that
until they get thrown into the van.
Exactly.
So, like we just have to think about,
Yeah. What is it that we want as a society? How can we get there? And how can we make the people who run things understand that if they take a risk in order to achieve something, to make things better, to improve things around here, that we'll back them up?
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. I mean, like one of the things you can do, get a lot of people to fund a political campaign. They have to listen to you if a group of you do it, because the reason that salaries stay low and CEO salaries stay high is because CEOs and companies like that can use lobbying firms who can drop tons of money into campaigns.
Yeah.
But individual people can't, and therefore the individual gets screwed over. Yeah. So there's lots of ways you can think about it as an individual and try to improve your life through politics, even small bits, small spending.
Yeah.
But we have to think way outside the box, because what's been going on is going to work. And, the midterms might be okay because, those who are active in politics and aware of things, they tend to vote in midterms. Mm-hmm. But in the next presidential election, it could all go back to the way it is.
Yep.
So, we still, and the same thing happens in the UK. In the UK, there could be an election tomorrow, because that's up to the prime minister. And if his position becomes untenable, they have no real argument to stay in office. And Nigel Farage is just the new kid on the block who definitely won't get rid of your rights, but he definitely will.
Yeah.
So we have to think about these things now.
I think you're absolutely right about that, Chris.
And as always, I'm Dr. Silverstein.
I'm Dr. Armshaw.
And we are doctors,
but not doctors.
Good night.